Hello, everyone. This is Ali Siadatan from Think Again Productions. If you've landed on this page, you know the main feature is the documentary UFOs, Angels, and Gods that you can watch. We released that documentary in 2006, and it had a lot of groundbreaking ideas. And I'm making a series of videos here that are short, that talk about these ideas that we brought up in the documentary, just to explore it. I think that some of these ideas are really new to the consciousness of people. I mean, they're very new to me, to the point where I felt I needed to share it with the world. And I think they're worthwhile thinking about and considering. There's a reason perhaps these ideas are coming to our consciousness at this stage in history. I don't think that it's ever been really talked about in such detail. So what are these ideas? Well, this particular video that you're watching right now, I'm going to talk about one of the ideas that we developed in the documentary, which was the relationship between the chariots that are mentioned in the Bible, the vehicles, and the whole UFO phenomenon. You know, this phenomenon of UFOs. In this whole idea, the reality of the UFO phenomenon and how it kind of made people revisit what was classified as myth. Didn't just shake our perspective or bring certain things to our attention that were in the Bible, the Hebrew scriptures, also in stories from all around the world. I mean, lots of non-biblical sources like Josephus, who wrote a book about the siege. The Roman siege against Jerusalem. He talked about these flying objects. We have accounts from Alexander's army, Alexander the Great. His army. He lived in the 300s BC. And he talked about his soldiers in his army talked about these things. We have so many ancient records from various cultures. The Hindu, for instance, culture. You always see the tale of their gods, and there's these flying chariots. In fact, the name for these chariots in the ancient Hindu Sanskrit was Vimana. And today, the name for aeroplane in modern Hindi is also Vimana. And it kind of shows you that there's a continuity of thought in that culture, that has brought the idea to the 20th century. So these reality of the UFO phenomenon triggered in a lot of people's minds a rethinking of these ancient documents. And in my case, I was exposed to it in 1996, 1997, when I was attending a Bible study, and the gentleman came in and he sat down and we were waiting for him to start. And he seemed very nervous, like he was, jittering and changing his feet. And usually, he wasn't an anxious man. And I thought, I wonder what's going on with him. I took note of it. So when we started, after there's a prayer, usually in a Bible study, I always say a prayer. And once we started, he said, turn to the scroll of the prophet Ezekiel in your Bibles, the book of Ezekiel. We're going to read the first chapter. And so he read it out loud. And we were kind of reading it together, and it was an interesting chapter. And he said, I want you to take your notepads. This was mid-1990s. Pens and papers and notes were more common. I want you to draw what you think Ezekiel was describing. So, we each drew. I'm not a great artist when drawing things, but I did my little best. And I drew what the circle within the circles that Ezekiel is talking about. And he then started to say that these ideas had come to him and they had been with him for quite some time, and he was reluctant to share it, but today he felt he needed to share it. And his idea was basically that perhaps there is a connection between the whole modern day UFO phenomenon and the accounts of flying angels, in the Bible, like the chariot that take Elijah away. And I'll go through these in a moment with you. And this was an incredible thought. I had never really considered the concept of angels in the Bible. I had never really sat down and done a study of that. I had come to study the Bible in 1991, and this was 1996. I had studied many of the Messianic prophecies and lots of other topics in the Bible, but I didn't really sat down and pondered the concept of angels as they're recorded in Scripture. And so, in a way, this was actually my introduction to the whole idea, and it really intrigued me that, wow, and it kind of made the angels real to me, the stories of these guys coming and going. And I started to see what I could find. There was nothing. I mean, from a Christian source, there was basically nothing. From non-Christian sources, there was all of these ancient astronaut theorists, like the Chariot of the Gods by von Däniken was a famous book, and there was Zachary Sish and other people that I started to look into. And even though I didn't prescribe to their perspective, which was the idea that these are alien astronauts and they also existed in the past. I didn't prescribe to that thinking, but I did find it interesting, the ancient artifacts and architectural feats and writings about these beings that they were pointing to in all of these cultures around the world. I had never really considered the idea that perhaps some of these things are not mythological. I was just going along with the kind of normative prescribed thinking about these things in the culture, which was, this is just stories and fairy tales. And why did our ancestors make up all these fairy tales? Well, they were primitive. I don't know. I had no thoughts about it. And so looking at these things and coming back and looking at these passages about the angels in the Bible, suddenly they did become a lot more real, obviously. So what our documentary presented, which was turned everything upside down, was that these beings that are in the Bible, they are not aliens. They are still the angels. They do come from God to mankind, and God himself shows up like the angel of the Lord, he is called. Let's say the vision of Ezekiel concerns the angel of the Lord. So that God and his angels essentially in the universe, that the angels of God actually use these vehicles. That is what the Bible is teaching. This was a new idea, I thought, because I couldn't find anybody else, saying this. The idea was not that these are aliens, but that we were rethinking the nature of the angelic world. The way that the Renaissance painters had painted the concept of angels, like bird-like characters. Well, I couldn't find that in the Bible. I never found a single passage anywhere in the Bible where I saw angels with bird-like wings. It doesn't exist. There are these gigantic wings described here and there, like again in the scroll of Ezekiel, and they lift it up when they move, and then they put it down when they stand, and it has this mighty noise like the sound of rushing waters, and it's not at all like bird-like wings. I'm not saying it's technological exactly like a jet. Obviously, this is on a whole other scale. We don't understand the makeup of it, but definitely it's not like a bird-like wing. So, and the angels are not described like little baby cherubs you see again in the paintings of the masters of the Renaissance, Raffaello, Michelangelo, and all of these guys, like you can see in the museums of the Vatican. And then the other concept of angels that was in the culture among just everybody was essentially they're magical beings. Like they do not need the laws of the creation like we do. Like they'll snap their fingers and things will happen. They'll just appear and disappear, and they just like wiggle their noses, and they're just creatures of magic. They have full mastery over the laws of the creation. Well, in the Bible, only God has full mastery over the laws of creation. Only he is in the creation and outside of the creation. Only he can make things come and into existence by simply his word and his command. He can bring the dead to life. He can turn, water into wine. God is the only one who has that power in the Bible. Everybody else, including all the angels in the Bible, are subject to the laws of creation. They have to function according to a way. They are not able just to do anything they want, right? So these were all Christian mythology that Christians, including very respected pastors whose knowledge of the Bible is wiser than mine will ever be, all had shared in this mythology, right? No one had really sat down and said, let's think about the nature of angels in the Bible. So there was a kind of a landscape, and I'm going to come back in a second to this because of the reaction that we got when we released this. So in the Bible, there are passages that talk about these things that are translated into English as chariots. Like the most famous one is the chariots of fire and horses of fire that take the prophet Elijah. It's in 2 Kings. The word in Hebrew, rechev, comes from the root word rakab, which means vehicle, something that carries a person from one place to the other. And actually, by extension, it also means cavalry. So this idea of carrying someone, a vehicle, why was it translated as chariot? Well, their humans had created chariots. And as far as vehicles, well, there was no other vehicle. What else was it going to be? It was a chariot that, the same way that our chariots carry the Pharaoh and his horsemen around, these chariots, they carry Elijah up into the heavens. Okay? But it's still a chariot. What else could it be? There was no other word in the culture. If the writers of these ancient scriptures lived today, they might have differentiated with other words, depending whether we're talking about the chariots of men or the vehicles of angels. We see that this is also mentioned by David in Psalm, I think it's 60. It talks about the fact that God is present at Sinai with his angels amongst his chariots. Even in the second coming passages, like Isaiah 66, verse 15, it says, "For behold, the Lord will come in fire and in his chariots." Right? Like the whirlwind, to render his anger with fury and rebuke with flames of fire. That's the whole verse. This idea that God comes with his angels, but it says, that God returns with his chariots. And the other word that is used is merkebah. So you got rechev and you got merkebah. And merkebah also has this idea of a vehicle. Like, for instance, modern day tanks in the IDF, they're called merkebah. It means tanks. And, I was talking to a friend of mine who is from Israel, and I said, what does merkebah mean to you? He said, well, if I came into my garage and I opened my garage and there was many cars that I owned, I could say, this is my merkebot. Like, these are my vehicles, right? So I was like, wow, that's interesting. So this idea of the fact that these things are mentioned in the Bible, and there's other passages, for instance, the children of Israel, they follow this thing out of Egypt, which is the angel of the Lord, but it does have like the shape of a pillar. You have the story of Elijah and his disciple Elisha, and Elijah prays to God and says, "Open the eyes of my student here, so that he can see that the chariots that are with us are more numerous than the ones that are with the opponent." There's the story of the Magi. They follow a bright star, which is an angel that leads them to God. Now, it's true that it could be astronomy, like an actual alignment, because the Magi were astronomers, and I don't have any problem with that, right? I'm just saying, what if, because it appears and disappears and then stands still on a single spot, and we see in the modern day UFO phenomenon this idea of a bright light leading people, or even the Lord, he ascends into a cloud, and then we see that in the prophecies of Daniel, like chapter 7 in the book of Daniel, that the Messiah, the Son of Man, arrives to the presence of God, the Ancient of Days, in a cloud. So what kind of a cloud did he go into that then took him all the way to God, right? So this idea starts to... You start to look at the modern day UFO phenomenon, and it now acts like a key that unlocks these passages. And then these passages then inform the modern day UFO phenomenon. And if you watch the documentary, you'll see how we then connected what the Bible says and build it up through the ages of history into the 20th century. One of the people I interviewed was Dr. David Jacobs, who was one of the world's foremost ufologists. I mean, I think he still is. Probably today, I would say that he is the world's foremost ufologist, actually. From the old school of ufologists that many of them have passed away, essentially. And, he's still alive. There's also Jacques Vallée, I believe he's still alive as well. J. Allen Hynek is dead. Dr. John Mack from Harvard is dead. Bud Hopkins is dead. There was another gentleman from Fredericton here in Canada. He was a professor, I forget his name, Friedman, Professor Friedman. He was also an important ufologist. But Dr. Jacob's still alive. So there is actual stuff these guys are documenting, but what does it mean? Through which lens are we to understand this phenomenon? So here we brought the idea, what if we understood it through the lens of the biblical writings? These characters have a relationship with the nations of humans and of men, and they're part of a narrative that is explained in history, like the origins of the human race and God's perspective as to why the world takes the shape it does, and what is the relationship between these beings and the world. They're not just bringing messages; they have incredible relationships. I mean, look at Satan. He says to Jesus that dominion has been given to him over all the nations of earth, over all the kingdoms of earth. He says, all the kingdoms of the world, dominion has been given to him. And he will give it to whomever he will. It says that in the temptations of Jesus. So it's like, wow, these beings have, a relationship. And God, of course, has an immense relationship with Israel. And these nations are the nations of history, like the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Persians and the Romans, the Mesopotamians, the Jews. This is the foundation of the world in which you and I are living in. And these beings continue to be with us. And they are headed to a place. There's a moment in history we're headed to where apparently God and his chariots return to the earth, and these beings that are here, and there's going to be a climactic event that will usher in the next stage, the next age of history. So in the Bible, human history is the result of the interaction of the relationship that we have with these beings and with God, and how this whole thing is playing out it's creating the human story. The human history is not just the result of humans doing the things they do. We are from the beginning presented as cosmic beings. Like, Adam is a character of a much larger story into which he's born, a story that is older than him. The universe has a history, and whatever is beyond the universe has a history. So we don't see the relationship because of the way that we've come to divide the Bible and the world it represents from the world that's outside of our window. I didn't realize that was a huge problem until actually the documentary came out, and people who really didn't have too much of a Christian education were like, wow, you've really made the Bible suddenly very real to me, and I'm actually interested in reading it. And wow, now I can see this idea that God gave laws at Mount Sinai, that he came into the earth, that angels rolled up the tomb of Christ. Wow, this can also all be real. And yet when it came out in 2006, Christian, especially scholars and teachers, they were very like, what are you doing? You're turning God into an alien, and angels, what are you talking about? And I was like, what? I'm not. What? So I had to kind of look into it. And this is what I found out, that basically, first of all, the nature of the angelic reality that's described in the Bible, first of all, angels are described as physical beings, right? Even God himself is described as a physical being. Like in Genesis chapter 18, God and two angels come and they have a meal with Abraham. They eat, they talk, right? He makes them lamb, and there's matzah, and they eat and talk, right? He announces the birth of Isaac to Abraham. So it's a very important conversation if you kind of look at it through the story of the Bible and where that family, where that story leads. Um, in the story of the Gospels, when Jesus, who is the Son of God and the son of King David, he comes back from the dead. He says, "Then he said to them, 'Why are you so shaken? And why do doubts arise in your heart? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see I have.' And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. But while they were still in disbelief due to joy and wonder, he said to them, 'Do you have anything to eat here?'" So he really made a case for his physical resurrection, and the followers of Jesus are also promised a physical body. Um, Sometimes I find that in the culture of the church, people think that Christians become a spirit and they remain in a spirit form for all the ages. That's not in the Bible. And the Bible talks about a new heaven and a new earth. It always describes even the most ultimate perspective of prophecy, the end of it all. The heavenly Jerusalem is described as a physical place. And the Lord himself is permanently the son of King David, right? I mean, this angel of the Lord, which we see starting in the Garden of Eden, he walks in the cool of the day. He visits Abraham, has meals with him. This character, this manifestation of God in time and space, becomes the son of David and remains in that state, even it is right now, at the right hand of God. And after his resurrection, he says, "Look, touch me." And other angels in the Bible, like the ones that kill the Assyrians, there's 5,000 Assyrians that are killed by these angels, or the one that pushes the tomb of Christ, and it says in Scripture that he sat on it. Why would the Holy Spirit bring us that precision if this idea of the nature of angels was not going to become a contested issue later, and God had in a way gone ahead and said, you know what, these details about the physical nature of the Messiah and of angels is something that I want to put in, right? Because the Greeks, Greek philosophers had challenged the idea of these physical gods, like Zeus and Hercules and all these guys, and they were like, you know what? We don't believe. There was a school of philosophers that started to say, we don't believe that if God, we believe in God, but we don't think these guys represent God. We don't think God would be so human and corrupt in his ways, and they imagine God to just be something that is above and beyond everything, omniscient, omnipresent, kind of this spirit, right? And so we see that in the Bible, God is also a spirit, and we also see that God inhabits eternity, like Isaiah says, and we also see that God has manifested himself in time and space and is in the midst of his creation. We see that this is the complexity of who God is. And so, but this idea of the Greeks, of the Greek schools, they said, you know what, all of these things are myths, and they called it mythos. And they said, we believe in this, more lofty manifestation of God that they called logos. And I think that this idea that was also adopted by the Gnostic schools of thought, that the ultimate manifestation of God is non-physical, I think made its way into an increasingly Gentile church, as the Greco-Roman world adopted this Jewish religion with its scriptures and its resurrected physical Messiah. Even Adam, when he is created, God breathes the breath of life into his nostrils, the neshama, and it says that he becomes a living soul, a chai nefesh, a living soul. It says he becomes a living soul. It doesn't say he has a living soul. It says that this guy walking around the garden, he is a living soul. The physical spiritual beings is actually the way that the Bible presents things to us. But this idea of a non-physical spiritual beings is something that pours into the church from the thinking of Greeks, not from the thinking of the Bible. And now there are spirits in the Bible, but that's a different thing. We're not talking about spirits here. We're talking about angels, right? And first there's that one verse that says that angels are ministering spirits. It reminds me of kind of a friend of mine who just became a Christian, and he said to me, we're not going to have bodies in the presence of God. And I said, well, where did you get that idea from? Because like in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, where it talks about the resurrection of the body and the giving of a new body, the celestial body, I mean, and the Messiah. And he said, well, it says no flesh shall inherit the kingdom of heaven. I said, well, yeah, flesh is an idiom for the fallen state of mankind. It's this, we need to be transformed spiritually and be atoned for, receive the Spirit, receive a new body, and then we will get a body. So for him, the word flesh suddenly meant more than it actually meant. He took it out of context. I immediately quoted to him, it just came to my mind, I think it's Job chapter 19, where Job says, in the flesh I will see my Redeemer. And so Job makes a whole point of saying that in the flesh he's going to see his Redeemer. That's kind of the word that came to my mind. And so when it says that the angels are ministering spirits, that has to be taken into context with all of these other passages that present the angels. That's one passage, but what about all these other passages? Some of these high-ranking angels, I believe, may have bodies of light, right? Because there is, I think, terminology in the Bible that points in that direction, and that they have bodies of light. But still, bodies nonetheless. It's gamma rays. It's a more, quote unquote evolved. I don't believe in Darwinian evolution in that sense, but I believe in creation. But still, evolved in the sense that it's more advanced. Like we are going to get a new body. So the physical nature of God and angels is definitely attested in Scripture. Now, we don't want to go to the other extreme and turn the angels into characters of science fiction. I said, no one had ever thought about these things. One of the guys that actually wrote about this was a man I interviewed. His name was Barry Downing. He wrote a book called The Bible and Flying Saucers that was printed in 1970. And it kind of looks comical, right? And the whole idea of flying saucers, that was a term back then that was very popular. But actually, if you were to read this book, it's a deeply academic book with references to Bible left and right. Every single page has tons of biblical references, as well as the references to science, because he was doing he did his PhD in the University of Edinburgh, where he was meditating on the relationship of science and religion by reflecting on the thoughts of Isaac Newton and the Bible. This is the kind of guy who wrote this book, right? So don't get fooled by the funny-looking cover of it. He was one of the first people to kind of make this connection. Yet we don't want to go to this extreme, right, where we turn the angels into characters of science fiction, like Gabriel gets into this mechanized vehicle, and then he's going around, and suddenly the pilot says to him, sorry, sir, we gotta make a stop at Alpha Centauri because the carburetor isn't working. No, we don't really know actually the exact nature of these biblical heavenly chariots. We don't know exactly how they operate. We don't know where they go. For instance, do they go from one realm to another? They're inter-realm vehicles. Do they fly past the speed of light? Einstein, in his famous formula, that energy equals E equals mc2, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. He said basically that if you take a mass and you throw it twice the speed, you throw it at the speed of light squared, then it will turn into energy. And so now he said nothing can go faster than light. Perhaps he's wrong. Perhaps these things go faster than light and they turn into energy and then they go into another realm. I don't know how it exactly works. So I don't want to turn it into this is Captain Kirk. And I don't want to also turn it into a story of ghosts, right? The UFO phenomenon is a real phenomenon. And people see things, and if you look at one of the videos I have here, I share my own sighting that I had in the deserts of Iran, and it was up close, and I saw this thing that had structure, and many other people do. One of the guys that I interviewed, or I tried to interview, but he wouldn't come on my documentary, was this guy here, Gary Bates. He wrote a book called Alien Intrusion in 2004. This one is 1970. This one is 2004. You know, he signed it for me when I met him. And his idea was, oh yeah, that no, it's all just angels and Satan and all these guys. They're just like ghosts, and this entire phenomenon is not real, and they're just like deceiving people. No, I don't agree. I don't. I think that no one agrees with him actually in the Christian world of researchers. I think he kind of stands alone, and I thought his ideas were weak, to be honest. But I said, no, I'll gladly interview you, and you can also present your perspective, because my idea was that let the viewer weigh and listen for themselves. But he wouldn't come. He was like, no, because you've interviewed Barry Downing, I will not come on your documentary. I was like, okay. Another guy that was writing about these things was Chuck Missler, who I met many times, and I've had dinner with him and attended private Bible studies with him. He wrote a book called Alien Encounters that came out in 1997. And so these were some of the earlier thinkers. And so we were right out the gate one of the first people to, actually I think we were the first people to make a documentary about all of this. So we don't want to go into one extreme where we turn the angels into just ghosts and creatures of magic, because angels actually are part of the created order and they operate within the laws of creation. And we don't want to dismiss all these biblical passages that point to vehicles. So we don't want to go into one extreme and make them into ghosts, and we don't want to go into the other extreme and make them into characters of science fiction. We have to live with the tension of the mystery that we're starting to see something here, but we don't have the full picture, right? Until we actually get into one, basically, like Elijah, and are taken up, then we'll be able to say, okay, this is how the whole thing works. This is where it goes. This is how it operates. Will we have even more of an expanded understanding of the world of angels, right? So why is this important? Well, it's important because the UFO phenomenon is, in fact, something that is on top on people's minds. It's huge. I mean, as a researcher, I know how important it is, but it's not talked about openly in the culture, but it's actually huge. And that's why movies that Hollywood makes are so popular, because people are interested in this stuff. And we see kind of, once in a while, even CNN and New York Times and official media kind of say, yeah, they're here. It's important because it may have a direct relationship to the second coming and to the prophecies of the Bible. If the fallen angels, which are here, and you got to watch the documentary to understand how we've built it up, the idea could be that, in fact, this whole UFO phenomenon leads into the story of the second coming. It's like a stew, and all the pieces of the stew, the beef and the carrots and the potato and everything is there, and it's kind of, you're letting it stew, and once it's all properly mixed together and is ready to be served, the UFO phenomenon is the beginnings of ultimately what will be the actual second coming. I mean, we have a footage on our from Columbia shuttle. You can see on the documentary where they put cameras in the Columbia shuttle and to just film randomly things in outer space. And there's this thing going, and another one comes and shoots at it and just misses it. I mean, you got to watch it. It's a real footage. It's been scrutinized to death, and everyone agrees this is a real piece of footage. So it's important because it may be related to what is ahead of us, like this whole idea that the Lord returns and He calls His people up to meet with Him in midair, and there's a war of angels, and He returns with a host of angels, because the Lord is called Adonai Tzvaot, which Tzva means army. So Adonai Tzvaot means the Lord of the armies of heaven, the Lord of heaven's armies. It's one of the main titles of God in the Bible. It's often translated into English as the Lord of Hosts. But that's what it actually means literally. So He comes back with an angel army. Why? Because there's an angel army here. And now this idea of a war can become very, very real. Now, why would God need one of these things? Well, obviously God doesn't need anything. I know that people like to put God in the biggest box they can find and feel all good about that. Like, God is beyond all of these things and God is this and that. Well, no matter how big a box you put God in, you've still put him in a box. You can't put God in a box at all, meaning that with God, we have to give him complete freedom. He can do anything he wants. That's the concept of God. And what we see is that he can choose. I say to people, yeah, as a Christian, I believe that God became a man. They're like, yeah, okay, yeah, sure, And you're like, yeah, God, he walked and he sat on little boats in the Sea of Galilee, on the boats of fishermen. And people are like, yeah, sure. And I'm like, you know what, this is going to sound really crazy to you. Like, don't throw stones at me or tomatoes or anything. But actually, God stood at the end of Roman whips. And people are like, yeah, I totally can see, yeah, I'm good with that. And then I suddenly say, and then God left and stands in the midst of his angels and in the glory of their heavenly chariots in the heavens, which is one of the terms in the Bible for what we would call outer space. And there's more to it than just outer space, but space is a part of what the word heavens encompasses. And people are like, no, there's no way, no. I'm like, so it's okay for him to sit on fishing boats, but if he's in one of these chariots in the midst of the heavens, that's not okay? Well, that doesn't make sense to me. So that must be some preconceived idea that there's a blockage in the way reality has been divided. And so the world of angels and the world of these things are not so different from each other. And the concept of the heavens in the Bible includes where the stars are and beyond. But the sun, the moon, and the stars, they are all in what's called in the Bible Shemayim, which is translated as Uranus in the Greek, in the New Testament, and which is what we would call the universe. Okay? So this idea is possible to think about the reality of angels. We're having a deeper understanding of the world of angels. And this phenomenon is related to this angelic reality. And if you want to know how it all falls together, watch the documentary, and we've kind of built it up. And I'm going to put a few more videos here that will help you understand the details of it. But we could be headed into a reality where, when the Lord and His angels return, that if the enemy, would have a deception, and that may be to kind of turn things around and make it look like an alien invasion, and in this way rally the world against him. We'll see. I mean, but watch it from the beginning, and you'll see how we've put the pieces of the puzzle together. And I hope this helps you think about the relationship between UFOs and the concept of these vehicles and chariots in the Bible, and the nature of the world of angels. And I felt that this stuff made these passages in the Bible come to life for me in a very real and literal way, and the whole concept of angels and their interactions with the human race. And in return, the Bible shed a lot of light on the true nature of this phenomenon and of even the alien abductions, which are the heart of the UFO phenomenon. And we've interviewed the world's foremost abduction researcher, and we have Dr. Chuck Missler bringing that biblical perspective, explaining it. It's fascinating. So I hope you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. I'm going to have more videos for you. You can go to my website, thinkagainproductions.com, and sign up for the newsletter, because there's a lot of stuff coming, and I look forward to seeing you around. Comment, email, interact. Oh, the Facebook page is called UFOs, Angels, and Gods. That's my Facebook page. And I put stuff there all the time. There's like about 6,000 people on there. And my Twitter handle, Iconoclast. Anyways, also recently I've started to go on Clubhouse, so look for me there. Have a beautiful day.